COVID is going to be behind us a bit more in 23. And because of that, there's going to be a resurgence of people coming into the startup community, trying to build meaningful businesses again.
Techsauce Global, sparking innovative thoughts. Now, there has been a lot of excitement as we are kind of at the phase where towards the end of the pandemic of COVID-19. So everything is kind of fresh now. Everybody really wants to know what's going on here in Thailand and the rest of the region. Today on the Techsauce Global podcast, we're going to take a look at the Hong Kong startup ecosystem. Hello, Swadika. You're listening to the Techsauce Global podcast. I'm Chawarat Yongjiran Arpupe, the global content editor of Techsauce Media. And today, I'm very happy indeed to be able to sit and talk across the sea to James Kwan, the founder, chairman, the executive chairman of Jumpstart, which is a venture development organization that has a variety of different innovation services, whether it is media events, accelerators, youth education programs, and venture capital investing in early stage startups in emerging markets. Hello, James.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so happy to hear from you too. First off, for those who are listening that may not be familiar with yourself or, and also Jumpstart, can you tell us a little bit about Jumpstart?
Yeah, sure. So Jumpstart is innovation as a service company based in Hong Kong. We do many different faceted areas in innovation, such as media. So we have online media. We also have a print media. So pre-COVID, we actually had Asia's largest English print media focusing on startups around the world. We also are involved with events around the world. So we partner with events in many continents. Pre-COVID again, we traveled around the world to these events, but I hope things going into 2023 will open up. Accelerators, we're doing our 5th cohort right now. We're currently focusing on metaverse, Web3, fashion, and lifestyle startups from around the world. 80% of the startups are from outside of Hong Kong, and 20% are inside. So we actually really have a great global program. We also do youth education innovation. We're the only private company in Hong Kong with a grant from the Hong Kong Education Bureau, working with secondary school students and helping them understand STEM and how to apply STEM in building businesses. And lastly, our latest foray, we went into venture capital, where we invest into early stage emerging market startups, mostly in South Asia.
Wow. I think that's a mouthful and a lot of things I think that you have been successful in doing. And it's funny how you said, again, yeah, that was pre-COVID-19, right? But of course, congratulations to you and
so
Techsauce
much.
as well. We have been able to kind of ride the wave of COVID-19 and we're here at the other side. So I'm sure a lot of people who are listening really wants to know, what the startup scene is like right now, especially in Hong Kong. Can you tell us about the situation there and the ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think Hong Kong is fairly unique where we're positioned, our population. I think the startup ecosystem here has a lot of great founder minds. It's just whether or not we could actually move outside of Hong Kong in a reasonable pace. But we do have a lot of support, which is a good thing at Hong Kong. So we have a lot of governmental support, and I guess in the new financial address, they actually are putting even more money into growing the innovation sector here. And we also have 2 large innovation quasi-governmental incubators. One is called Cyberport, and the other is called Hong Kong Science Park. So we're surrounded by a lot of support from the government. From that, we get a lot of investor interest as well into the startups. And right now we have 3,500 startups in Hong Kong, and I think that number is growing. And with that, we also have about 20 unicorns. So with the 20 unicorns, we're probably in Asia for a small country like Hong Kong, 7.5 million people. We probably have more unicorns per capita than in any other Asian neighbor, right?
Indeed. Thailand, we're just so happy with a couple right now. For those who are curious, I'm curious. How was it during COVID-19 for you? just for us to really understand, how you were able to persevere.
Yes, so I could just give a point of reference. So
Mhm.
in 2019, before COVID, I traveled the world for innovation events. I was probably had about 50 plus hotel nights outside of Hong Kong.
Mhm.
Um, since then, I haven't left Hong Kong for 3 years until I went to the Techsauce event last month, 2 months ago in
Yeah.
Bangkok. That was the first event I went to because Hong Kong, as you know, had pretty strict quarantine requirements. It was
Mhm.
floating between 7 and 21 days. The moment it hit 3 days quarantine, I was out. I was at Texas. It was worth it. Texas is the best event in Southeast Asia, and I had to be there, right? So,
Thanks.
um, so I'm just using that as a point of reference.
Mhm.
And with that closure, it really stifled a lot of different businesses in Hong Kong. There's been not just talking about startups, but let's talk about SMEs. So many small mom and pop shops shut down during that period of time. It's not sustainable.
Mm.
We really had pretty quite restrictive rules, such as couldn't go to restaurants for a certain period of time. And if you had to go to a restaurant, it has to close by 6. You couldn't sit with more than 2 people. I think that affected the curiosity of other investors, external investors, to explore Hong Kong.
Mm.
Yeah.
So now that things are kind of opening up now, and what you've said so far is that like now, what do you think people are thinking of when they think of Hong Kong? Do you think that now it's more easier? Do you think the pace is going to be faster in terms of how things are going?
I think so. I mean, I started seeing people around town and they said, wow, the moment they dropped the quarantine, which they only did a month ago, people started coming back into Hong Kong. So it's going to start with the visitors. It's going to increase into events. And I see a lot of activity with live events these days around Hong Kong. These are not the international events, it's more the
Hmm.
local events. But I'm glad to see that people are going. And I think the big international event we had here, though it's not startup focused, was the rugby sevens.
Uh,
And that's when we had 30,000 people in a stadium. We had international teams come and play. But that shows things are going to happen again for Hong Kong, which is I'm quite optimistic for 2023 and 24.
that's definitely good news. Same here as well here in Thailand. We're kind of experiencing that as well. What about the startup investment landscape in Hong Kong? How has it been?
Hmm. As you know, around the world, there's been a funding winter. I don't think
Mm.
Hong Kong is any exception. The
Hmm.
landscape itself will change. I mean, Hong Kong, I think the early stage investments in terms of the investment amounts probably won't change, but probably the valuations of the teams getting the money will change, right? So
Mm.
valuations are going to be a little bit more scrutinized. I think early stage still has ways to develop businesses. When you start getting into the B and C rounds, I see that being the toughest part of startup fundraising in Hong Kong. Later stage is always still going to be interest pre-IPO, but even that is drying up as well with the way the
Mm.
equities market is working and IPO
Hmm.
listings not really going well for startups recently. I think that's also a tough area. So early stage, yes, I think it's still going to be vibrant. Mid to late stage, it's going to be a bit more challenging, especially for raising money.
The thing is that Hong Kong's not alone. Going through this. It's happening around the world. Is that it's tough, isn't it? But we are resilient, right? We've had the pandemic, and now we have the economics issue, shadowing over us. But as you mentioned, there's always positivity to see that, especially as what you said. There have been so many unicorns. That have come out from Hong Kong. Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of industries these unicorns have been coming from?
I mean, fintech is always a big business here in Hong Kong. I think uh, Airwallex represents a very solid fintech company here. I think logistics works. I think one of the shining stars of the Hong Kong ecosystem is Lala Move, and they're in logistics, and they really pushed it to be a global play. And they're about $10 billion right now, which is great to see that we diversified a bit. But I think fintech, health tech, I think moving into the crypto blockchain world. I think Hong Kong has always been vibrant. I mean, if you
Okay.
think about it, Crypto.com, FTX, BitMEX, and I
Wait a
think
minute, there's some issues there, aren't there?
there is, but people do see Hong Kong as a good space to go into. I think
Mm,
intriguing tax rules as well as a separate entry point into other places in Asia and the world. So yeah, so it's an interesting sector, but Hong Kong somehow had a lot of these larger companies start here or form here. And even Binance really
mm.
worked its way in Hong Kong, but it moved to Singapore. It had just a compelling offer by the Singaporean government, I think.
Mm. Well, it's interesting because, of course, it really depends on the environment in terms of what industry is getting the most attention. Before, during COVID-19, it was the health tech. Do you have a sense of what's kind of like the next thing, the next thing that's attracting people right now? What kind of industry are people looking into right now?
I think Web3 is the big thing right now. Web3,
Mm-hmm.
metaverse, people are exploring that area, and I see that Hong Kong's enjoying a lot of that upside in that space. I think it's also helpful that Animoca is based in Hong Kong. And having Animoca, I think that you get a lot of that ecosystem pushing outwards to the regular Joe Blow startup community founders, right? We all get influenced. So a lot of Web2 companies are exploring how to get into Web3. I think just this morning I had a call with a group who just got a big metaverse contract with a big fashion retailer, which I can't name.
Okay.
And they're opening offices in Hong Kong. They feel Hong Kong could bring in a lot of talent, ideas, development that could actually springboard into mainland China as well. So I
Mm.
see Dubai as being a very big hub, but in East Asia, I would say Hong Kong will be the big Web3 hub as well.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That is going to be very interesting to see how that grows. I've been writing about it as well, Web3, a lot of talk about it. But of course, a lot of people who are listening here want to learn about how they can, move or take their businesses to the next level. And as you've said, there have been many outstanding startups coming from Hong Kong, and they've been able to scale to overseas markets. In addition to the startups that you've talked about earlier, what have been some of the ones that you think are really good examples of how they've been able to scale abroad?
Yeah, so I have to go back to Lala Move a bit,
Mm-hmm.
only
Okay.
because I think one thing that separated Lala Move was their ability to go into the US market. So there's other markets that people normally could go to. Logically, a lot of companies would look into Southeast Asia
Mm-hmm.
or China, and then move into Europe. But moving into the US, I think that represents I guess a good pathway,
Mm,
especially if you succeed and they've succeeded. So that is not a fintech company that went through. I think Klook, which is a travel tech company, they had a few tough years, really tough years with COVID. But I see that market rebounding because there's going to be a travel vengeance, especially from people from Hong Kong. They really love traveling, and I think Klug would benefit from that bump up. And as regions open, that might be a good rebound play coming up
mm.
shortly.
So what would from your perspective, what would you say from your observation, what would you say would be the key to the success in scaling overseas? Or do you think that is kind of like particular to each and every country or every region?
Well, I think one of the things that separate Hong Kong is that we're such a small city. We have 7.5 million people. So we knew from day one, you have to have an international game, right?
Mm,
People in China or India, for example, I think from day one, they focus on a domestic market. And that probably could even sustain them to unicorn status. They just go all the way up and they might not ever need to leave. But Hong Kong is so small, international game from day one. Southeast Asia is probably the number one area where Hong Kong startups would expand to first. I would
mm-hmm,
think years ago it was China, but we all realize that the China game is so hard to crack. Going
mm,
into China, I would think it gets a little bit tougher even for Hong Kong teams. So Southeast Asia, I think South Asia, moving into Europe, these are natural expansion points. So I think there's the mindset of the founders a bit different.
I think that's a really good point, and I don't take it lightly that you said that, like even Hong Kongers are hesitant going to China. Who, you know, it's a tough market, and I think everyone has realized that, and really I think it depends on w- understanding your brand and understanding your business and seeing where it could potentially work out. But it's also interesting that you said that, that Lala move going to the US is a key of success. So would you say that, that is kind of like the goal of
I don't think it's necessary to go for every startup, but for a
Mhm.
logistics startup, I'm originally from New York, and I was always seeing a man with a van, right? Which is their business, right? They just connect you with vans of drivers, and I always thought that that was a saturated market, but evidently I'm wrong because they went into the U.S. and they were quite successful in their entry points. I guess no one has really consolidated this type of business, and they had experiences in Asia and scaling. So I'm really happy for them, and that's why I think they're one of the largest valued companies here in Hong Kong at $10 billion.
Okay.
Not
Let's
the
talk about
largest, but they're one of the largest.
yeah.
Yes.
Let's talk about government support. How has, as you mentioned, government support being very supportive, how have they supported the tech ecosystem there?
So the tech ecosystem, I think there's a lot of opportunities for anyone, even founders as young as 18 years old to start thinking about starting a business. So with the Cyberport and the Hong Kong Science Park grants, you could get it once you turn 18. There's a grant called the CCMF from Cyberport, for example. You get about 13,000 US dollars to really give a punt to an idea business. And as you mature, you get something called the incubation program, CIP. And with that, you have up to, if I had to translate the currency, is about 65, $70,000 worth
Mm.
of grant money. But with that, people think it doesn't stop there. So the government also supports you. If you went to an accelerator, which is approved, like our accelerator, you get another I'm just translating the currency. It's about $35,000 worth. If you were to
Mhm.
do overseas events like at Techsauce, the government would support you with another 35,000 US dollars
Wow.
for marketing. And if you needed to hire R&D, this is the big one. You get about 200,000 US dollars worth of
Wow.
support over two
Oh,
years. So they actually pay the salaries of these guys to work with you for R&D. So there's quite a bit of money. It equals about half a million US dollars if you utilize their full support. Um, and this is equity free.
wow. So this has not changed since COVID-19.
It has not changed. I think it's even going to get, the pot is even going to get sweeter after COVID-19. I have a
Wow.
feeling that these amounts are going to increase. The type of supports that startups get from the government is going to increase. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of support. Even a lot of support when we talked in before about maybe scaling internationally. We actually have something called the BUD, which actually gives you a few million Hong Kong dollars to go to China. And now there's a BUD for a few million Hong Kong dollars to go into Southeast Asia. And this is
Wow.
all free as long as you show that you're a business that could scale overseas. So you're rewarded with that now.
Ooh, we're jealous. That's jealous. Um, okay, so of course, there's always the good side and the bad side, or you could say, the challenges and the things that you need to work on. From your perspective, what are some of the strong and weak points of the startup ecosystem in Hong Kong?
I think people in Hong Kong are naturally entrepreneurial. So I think they'll always have ideas to start businesses. I think it's been well documented. People in the southern part of China, including Hong Kong, they've always tried to be independent merchants or business people. So I think that's good in their DNA. I think money is still available for early stage, a lot of government support. So these are all the strong points that we discussed before. If I had to say what's the weak point, now I have to say that Hong Kongers sometimes, in a general sense, have been also very successful in the normal world, meaning parents and grandparents have done well in the property market. I think, as you know, Hong Kong probably has the most expensive property in the world, exceeding New York and Tokyo and London, let's say. And that's because a lot of people purchased property in the 1960s. So
Mm.
these average people, and these are just very average people, became millionaires. So we probably have more millionaires per capita than anywhere in the world through property. And because of that, the property game is always in the minds of people now. So
Mm.
when a startup founder wants to start a business, the parents are like, "Hey, why don't you just buy another apartment and sit on it and buy a few apartments and you could grow your wealth that way." Um, I think the weakness, and I'm getting to the point, the weakness is that Hong Kong youth these days have too many options. And
Mhm.
and entering the startup world means dedication, long-term dedication, and that might not be the case. If you have 2 bad years or 3 bad years, such as what you had in COVID, a lot of people are like, "You know what? Maybe I'm just gonna go back to investment banking. Maybe I'm just gonna go back and listen to my parents and take that apartment and get some rental income."
Mm.
Not for all, but I do see that there are a lot of options here in Hong Kong, and that kind of derails from having solid founders with dedication to the end. It's not do or die here in Hong Kong, and that's a weak point.
I can totally picture that happening. It's a very Asian kind of situation scenario that you would see
It
in
is.
Asia, and I mean, it's no surprise, right? That you would have that as a potential challenge for the growth of the ecosystem there. Um, but then, in terms of those who are still at it, those who are still, very determined, very passionate about, moving their startups forward, especially after COVID-19. What are some of the challenges that you've seen them face nowadays? I think we kind of picture with the poor economy, and what are some of the opportunities that you are also seeing for Hong Kong startups right now after COVID?
Like I mentioned, I think some of the companies that didn't do well during COVID, such as the travel companies, are going to make a comeback. That's anything that's post-COVID, anything that was successful in 2019 will be successful again in 2023 and 24. So there's been bumps in the road. So, and it worked both ways, right? We had startups that were very successful because of COVID, right? We have some teams that focused on COVID solutions. We had Prenetics in Hong Kong. They IPO'd on the Nasdaq, right? Because they did COVID testing, which was their main revenue driver. We had another company called Orabeat, graduate of YC, and they did air purifiers that focused on COVID solutions. But I think COVID is going to be behind us a bit more in 23. And because of that, uh, there's going to be a resurgence of people coming into the startup community, trying to build meaningful businesses again. And that's going to be more of typical startups that were in 2018, 2019 will rise again. And blockchain enabled technology companies that focus on Web3 and metaverse will become a focus here in Hong Kong.
What is your advice for startups who are struggling, perhaps in terms of what's been going on with the evaluations and the poor economic environment right now?
They need to be flexible and nimble, right? They have to go with the flow. And if investors globally, not just in Hong Kong, don't be stubborn, things change. And if the environment changes in terms of your next fundraise, you got to move along with it. Don't be offended when people come up, and don't be thin-skinned when people say, "You know what? I honestly think your startup is worth X." I mean, we had a
Mm.
startup that finished our accelerator, had a $10 million valuation at the end of the program, and recently accepted their last round at about $4 million. So,
Ooh,
so
wow.
it's just what's happening now with the winter funding, right? It's
Mm,
just things that either you accept it or you don't, and sometimes when you don't, does it mean that you have to give up your dream to do your startup? I think you just have to be reboot, be flexible.
yeah, definitely. Be like water. Do I sound corny?
That's a Bruce Lee line,
Yes,
right?
that's the Hong Kong tie-in.
Yeah,
No,
yeah, yeah,
that's a
yeah.
bit too
There it
far.
goes.
um, but yeah, okay, let's take a look at 2023. When we talk about 2023, I think that a lot of people are excited. They kind of just want to get 2022 over with and get towards the future, and see what will happen with the startup ecosystem. Towards the end of 2022, right now, what is your vision for the future for the startups here in the region, especially in Hong Kong? Do you see things happening that are taking us back to pre-COVID-19, or has our experience with COVID-19 really changed or transformed the ecosystem into something else?
Yeah, so I I think one thing I didn't mention before, so it kind of answers your question now. But one thing I didn't mention, what do I see in 23 as well, and significant for Hong Kong would be the rise of prop tech. And I believe prop tech is something that hasn't been around pre-COVID because people didn't believe in it and people didn't buy into it. But now, when we see the transformation of these larger property conglomerates here in Hong Kong are shifting from their first generation owners to second generation owners, where they have more youthful CEOs. There's going to be a rise of prop tech in Hong Kong. And I believe that's going to be very interesting, where these property traditional companies are going to start integrating technologies. So I think that's going to be interesting for 23 to see what happens. I think generally everybody will have a better 23 than a 22.
Mhm.
And I think going forward, I do wish startups great success in the region, especially here in Hong Kong. Um, I hope opportunities open up, which I do. I'm very bullish on the startup ecosystem developing fruitfully here in Hong Kong.
Mm. And lastly, how what would your advice be for those who are listening right now, whether they be corporates or startups?
Yeah, so corporates, my advice to you is don't be afraid of innovation. Work with startups. I think giving out proof of concepts or commercial contracts, working with startups is going to be the future. Don't be shy and don't be so conservative. I think for startups, I think after we saw how tough COVID was, give give it your all. Push hard. Be nimble and flexible. Work with the investors, but also when you get commercial contracts, don't be arrogant. Do what you have to do to succeed. Do what you have to do for some startups to survive. Don't be so proud.
You couldn't have said it better, I think. And I think a lot of us have learned that during the past few years. Thank you
Yes.
so much, James, for being with us here today. We can't wait to see what's to come from Jumpstart and yourself as well. And we're so excited to see you possibly coming back to us as well here in Thailand. And we'll be monitoring what has been going on or will be going on in Hong Kong in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, Techsauce is my favorite event in Southeast Asia. I'll always see you guys on a yearly basis. Fingers crossed there's no more COVID.
Yes. Okay. And this has been yet another episode of Techsauce Global Podcast. We'll see you next time. As always, สวัสดีค่ะ Techsauce, sparking innovative thoughts.